Okay, so we'll just get started. I would just like to thank Greg for coming along tonight. Thanks, Greg. It's going to be a fascinating talk, I'm quite sure. We're delighted to have you join us. Greg, for people that don't know who Greg is, we've got Greg Kenicer from RBGE, Royal Botanic Gardens, Edinburgh. And Greg is one of the educationalists there. He's also a botanist, and he's also an author. And I've seen you on the TV as well. You've been on Beech Grove too, Greg. So Greg's talk tonight is going to be about Scottish plant law, a fascinating insight into the many native plants of Scotland and their uses. Greg will be talking about plants that we can eat, to the humble weeds on our urban streets and wild environments, and Greg will also help us to unlock the importance of these plants and their uses. So a real insight into native plants of Scotland. For those of you that haven't had a copy of Greg's book, I don't know if you can see this, I've got Scottish Plant Lore. It's a RBGE publication. Highly recommend it. It's just beautiful. It's got fascinating information in it. It's beautifully illustrated by some of the botanical artists throughout Scotland. And I really like the way the sections are in different categories, from seashore to moorlands and mountains to grasslands to woodlands. So maybe Christmas present coming up for people that are keen on their plants. So it's well worth a read, folks. So without any further ado, I'd quite like to introduce Greg and just hand over to Greg. So Enid or Chloe, do you want to share your screen? I don't know how Greg's going to do this. So you want to, can Greg just set up his screen just now? You got it, Chloe?
No.
No. Let's have a wee look.
Can you do it, Jean, because you're a co-host?
Sure. Greg, I'm not quite sure how to. I don't have your screen on my laptop. Can you open up your screen, Greg?
I think he maybe lost connection. He's coming back in now.
Okay. No.
I'm having a quiet moment of contemplation.
I can see his. His signal must be quite bad. Fingers crossed. Oh, there he is. Greg, can you launch your presentation? There he is, yeah.
Hi there, folks. Did you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Is that behaving itself? I think I'm back in, but no. Oh yeah, I've seen a few nods there, I think. Perfect. What I might do, I might just if I plug in my connection, we'll see if we get a better, stronger signal for that. Shouldn't take a wee second, and then I'll crack on. Thanks very much. So thanks very much, folks, for your patience in the face of, as always, there's that big danger, I think. But I'll share what we've got for presentation, and we're going to have a wee look just at Scottish plant lore. So this is a really quite fascinating area to investigate. There we go. And we'll just see if that comes up okay. So are you able to give me a wave if you can see that come up okay? And sounds like you can hear me as well then. So brilliant. Good. I'll pop that up. And we'll just have a wander through sort of a tiny, tiny little corner of the lore of Scottish plants. And it is quite an amazing, fascinating topic, really deep, rich. And even though we don't have a huge number of different kinds of plants as native in Scotland, we've got an enormous range of lore and really interesting ideas that have come into Scotland or originated here as well over the years. And it's just when you look at the kind of context of where Scotland sits in Europe, it's right in the corner, kind of tucked up on the edge, but the number of different peoples that have contributed to the kind of knowledge and lore and understanding of how we use plants is enormous through thousands and thousands of years, right from the kind of the hunter-gatherers of the kind of Middle Stone Age, right through to the modern day, where we've got people coming up with loads of weird and wonderful new ways to use plants as well. And then all these different groups of people in between. So are you seeing that okay? And oh, great, something's a bit suspicious. I'm a bit, yeah, we'll see how we go. So it is amazing. We are really lucky, but we're also extremely lucky because we've got lots of really interesting sources of evidence for this, which means we can start to kind of really piece together this jigsaw of how people use plants. And we've actually got some pretty sort of interesting, sophisticated stories about it as well. So we've got lots of stories that relate to native plants. So those are the ones that kind of found their way here by blowing sort of in the wind or in the kind of stomach of a bird or that type of thing. But we've also got a host of things that were brought in by humans with their own knowledge and their own lore as well. And I don't know, you can almost kind of give me a thumbs up or a bit of a thumbs down in these cases. If you know this plant on the right here, it's the one with that name, Egopodium podagraria. Has anyone ever had to dig this monster out of your garden at all? Yeah, this is we've got lots and lots of different names, really interesting plant, but often called ground elder, because it looks a bit like the elder tree, but grows on the ground. And if you know yourselves, the way that the leaves, the roots get under the ground, these kind of underground stems it has, it just spreads and spreads and spreads, and it's a monster to dig out. But actually, it was probably brought in by the Romans, or more likely some of the kind of early monastic kind of monk communities who brought it in as a medicine. So it's maybe from Central Europe as its main kind of distribution, where you find it in the wild. But it was brought in as a medicine for gout. So if people had gout, they would have this plant and supposedly it would cure them. And that's partly how it got its name, bishopweed. So one of its other names is bishopweed. And people suggest that it's because it was grown in all the gardens near the monasteries where the bishops were, or the kind of the cathedrals where the bishops were. This is where you would have this particular plant associated with bishops. The other reason, of course, is because people always assumed that bishops had loads of high living, drunk too much red wine, and ended up getting gout. So they needed this plant to cure them instead. So a fascinating kind of what we call non-native plant. And on the left, a bit further behind, you see this around quite a bit. It looks like lots of other stuff you find in the Scottish flora, but this one quite likes shady woodlands, and it's called sweet Sicily. It's got a really soft leaf, and it's quite cool because if you break it and smell it, it's got quite a kind of delicate aniseedy smell, really quite pleasant indeed. And people use this, again, it's from Central Europe and through into Turkey, but people brought this over and they would harvest the leaves in medieval times when you were living in a household where everybody was unwashed and everybody smelled, let's be honest, and you were living with the livestock, so you'd have cattle and sheep probably in the house as well. You could take this plant and put the leaves on the floor, and then walk over it. You get this lovely scent wafting up of this kind of like faint aniseed scent, just absolutely delicious. So it's what you call a kind of a strewing herb. And again, one of these ones that was brought in by the Romans, and used also because of that flavour as a pot herb. So you'd put it into a pot and you would use it for flavouring up stews and things like that. And we actually worked with the folk at Edinburgh Gin, and we use this as one of the ingredients in a gin that we make, which is quite an interesting kind of modern take on stuff as well. So it's got a heritage going back 1500 years, but it's used through into modern times as well. So really amazingly versatile stuff coming in from Europe and from wider world as well. But we'll mostly look at the stuff that kind of is what we call native plants, the things that live here under their own, or got here under their own steam. So a lot of our knowledge about this comes from writing in particular. There's some archaeological remains that are pretty good, but always difficult to interpret. But we're really lucky that from the kind of late 1600s, you had people like this chap here. This is Robert Sibbald, who founded the Botanic Garden in Edinburgh. They started to think, okay, what's out there and how are people using it? And in part, it was motivated by how can we make money out of it? But also, I mean, for Robert Sibbald's case, it was amazing. There was a really terrible famine in the 1680s, up the East Coast in particular, where thousands of people died because of crop failures. And Robert Sibbald, who was Geographer Royal at the time, he realised that if he could work out all the potential plants you could eat and all the animals you could eat in Scotland, they could help to, avert other disasters, more famines in the future. So he wrote a really interesting wee pamphlet called Provision for the Poor in Time of Dearth and Scarcity. And it's great. You can get hold of kind of reproductions of it online, but it lists 100 plants or so, like little wild cabbages and wild cresses and blackberries and lots of stuff that we know about, but also quite a few more obscure things too. And he lists loads of animals you can eat as well. And unfortunately, on that list, we have wildcat, we have porpoise, we have pine marten, we have a whole host of the stuff that's pretty rare nowadays, and that probably explains why it is. It's good. So yeah, we've also got loads of more recent writers as well. So folk like John Lightfoot and James Robertson as well. They're more recent writers. They've done stuff, and then we've got people like just nowadays, Mary Beath, Anne Baker, Sam Milliken, and Sam Bridgewater and William Milliken, who wrote Flora Celtica, and then Tess Darwin. And maybe want to make a wee note of these names potentially, because if you're interested in this, they've written some really great, very accessible books that are well worth a read. There's also lots of dictionaries, so dictionaries in Gaelic and Scots as well, often record a wee bit as well of how people traditionally use stuff. So we're really lucky, we've got a lot of literature there that tells us how people were using these plants in the past. So what's great about the kind of the dictionaries is they also quite often record names of plants as well, and that's an interesting way that shows how we interact with plants, is how we name them, what we call them as well. So these two things here, I don't know, you might know, you can maybe have a thumbs up if you know that thing up on the top left that grows beside rivers very often. Yeah, that's a funny one. It's kind of often called butterbur. So it was used with these big leaves to wrap butter up. But one of its other names in Scotland, kind of a very local particular one, is flapper bags. Okay, so because it looks, when it dies back, it looks like old plastic bags, people call it flapper bags. And this one down the bottom right hand side, you might need a quick wee thumbs up here to see if you'll know that as dandelion, I guess. Is that the most common thing? But you might know things like pea the bed as well. Sometimes it's called that, and lots of other names, because apparently if you touch it, if your kids are told not to kind of pick it, because it can make them pee the bed, and it was used as a diuretic in the past for that. So we have also, there's a wee local bit of Lanarkshire, because basically there's that funny little red bit you can maybe see there, the kind of stalk that holds the flower head up. That's hollow, as you maybe know, and when you break it off, you can put it in your mouth and blow it like a kazoo and get this kind of humming noise. So that kind of reference to bum pipe is actually humming. Like if you've ever come across foggy bummers as bumblebees, that bum is actually hum. So a lot less rude than it sounds, but one of these beautiful wee names that people often have for plants locally. So I suspect if I asked everybody here, if you've got names for like pet names for plants, everybody will. And we've done a kind of quite a bit of research into it and found that amongst the 1,200 kinds of plants you find in Scotland, there's over 10,000 names. And that just shows you how important they've been to people through the years. It's amazing. And lots of them really funny ones like that. So what we'll do now is we'll just take a wee kind of tour from the seashore up to the mountainside and then into the cities as well. And I've just pulled out some images from a book that we've done at the Botanic Garden, beautifully illustrated by botanical illustrators. So there's a few of them scattered through, but we'll pick up on just a few of these useful plants as we go. First of these, at the seashore, we've got things like this. This is marram grass. Some of the seashore grasses in places like Orkney and Shetland in particular, where you didn't have access to willow or hazel, these were the things very often that you'd make baskets from. So people using resources when based on what was there. So it's kind of a bit of a tough one to find. Seaweeds, of course, by the seashore were fundamental, really, really important. So we've got here lots of nice things. This green one down on the bottom left there is sea lettuce. And we've got up in this kind of funny, kind of smallish brown one in the middle there is carrageen, both of which were used as foodstuffs, as were many of these other things. We've got sugar kelp or sugar rat here on the left-hand side, the orange one, and that was it's got quite a sweet kind of sugar in it called mannitol that people would often use as a kind of sweetener almost, and it would give a kind of savoury and sweet taste. It's very closely related to some of the ones that people use in Japan nowadays as well. You yourselves might have used this one here. This kind of one of the ones that's just incredibly nutritious and provides lots of resources for plants, so very successful. But I think one of the most interesting ones is this thing here, that red dulse, and we'll have a look at that in a second. So that's the kind of one with these fronds just pointing downwards. And this is it here in life, a photograph of dulse. And it takes a bit of time to read, but I'll just read out this quote from Martin Martin, who was a Gaelic-speaking kind of researcher almost in the late 1600s. He was trained as a doctor, and he tells us about something that seemed to be used quite widespread through Scotland. So he says, a large handful of the sea plant dulse growing upon stone, being applied outwardly, as is mentioned above, takes away the afterbirth with great ease and safety. This remedy is to be repeated until it produces the desired effect. Although summers may be intermittent, the fresher the dulse is, the operation is stronger. For if it's above 2 or 3 days old, little is to be expected from it in this case. This plant never or seldom fails of success, though the patient's been delivered several days before. And of this I've lately seen an extraordinary instance in Edinburgh in Scotland, where the patient was given over as dead. And what he's saying here is that this incredible seaweed here was, if a mother had given birth and the afterbirth hadn't come out at all, then doctors of the time would take this seaweed and drop it onto the stomach of the mother, and it would help to expel the afterbirth, which if it didn't happen would be a very, very serious thing. And it's something we don't know how it worked, we don't know properly if it worked at all, but it's a really fascinating little kind of account we have of it, and just a little snippet of history that we love. Some people think it might be because of the plant itself, or the kind of the seaweed itself looks a little bit like the afterbirth or placenta, the red colour and things. And there's this kind of slightly magical concept that people had called the doctrine of signatures, where you would, if you had a plant that looked like a disease, you would use it to cure that disease or another kind of health problem. It's a really fascinating idea. My theory is, I think if anyone has a huge lump of wet seaweed dropped on their stomach, then their stomach will contract, and I guess it will help to flush anything out of the system. Anyway. So this is another one, just a kind of like an elegant little kelp here. And these are the chunky kind of brown seaweeds. So this looks much more delicate than the real thing when it's underwater. But they were dead important for burning and a core part of what's called the kelp industry. So that was the big industry all around the coast of Scotland that the lairds got the crofters and kind of in non-Gaelic speaking parts. Similar, you would have the landowners getting the local folk that were kind of, so not slaves, but they're kind of peasantry, essentially, to burn huge amounts of this brown seaweed and it produced a really rich kind of ash, which had lots of sodium in it and lots of potassium in it, so great for fertilizer. It was used for making soda glass, so making glass in the kind of early 1800s, for iodine a bit later in the 1800s, and for bleaching linen as well. It was basically a great way for the landlords to make money. Okay, but of course, chemistry came along and found ways of isolating iodine from other places. People discovered much cheaper sources of this kind of alkaline to collect huge amounts of bird droppings and use that as a fertilizer. And what happened was the bottom fell out of this seaweed burning industry, and that devastated the kind of the economy. And what the lairds did, of course, was they said, right, we're going to have to make money. We're going to have to clear you off because you can't make us money by burning seaweed anymore. And instead, we're going to bring on the sheep. And in fact, the failure of this kind of kelp industry is what effectively started the Highland clearances, or was one of the kind of key things for that. So these plants have a kind of profound effect on how whole societies have happened, and the whole societal structure of Scotland has happened, and the diaspora. So all the Scots are in the world, a large number of them, it's because of this failure of the seaweed industry. So yeah, for very local uses and for huge big scale uses as well, these plants have been really important. So there's our soda ash, and that shows, I think this is an orchid, this one here, so quite late actually. And there's a woman through the kind of, I think 1840s, 1850s, just showing you quite, it's almost, people thought it was like volcanoes at times. You had lots and lots of people burning this ash and just feeding it in over the course of 24 hours, it would burn down to this kelp ash. So yeah, amazing stuff. Now, this is another Martin quote here, and it relates to the little green leaves. This is scurvy grass. So lots and lots of plants around the coast and lots of plants have got lots of vitamin C in them. And usually this is one of the ones that people would eat if they were getting scurvy. It's got lots of vitamin C and helps you kind of get rid of the scurvy, which is that vitamin C. And the only reason that people use lemons and limes on your sea voyages was because you could preserve lemons and limes. If you've ever had rocket or one of those kind of spicy members of the cabbage family in the back of a fridge for more than 3 days, the kind of weird, horrible black mass that it produces is basically what would happen if you tried to take it to sea for 3 days. And that's why this thing was never eaten on ships at all. But for everybody around the coast where they could get it live, they would use it. It was their classic kind of anti-scurvy treatment. And Martin says this rock, which he talks about St Kilda, I think, affords a great quantity of scurvy grass of an extraordinary size and very thick. The natives eat it frequently, as well boiled as raw. 2 of them told me they happened to be confined there for the space of 30 hours by contrary wind, and being without victuals fell to eating the scurvy grass and finding it of a sweet taste, far different from the land variety. They ate a large basketful of it, which did abundantly satisfy their appetites until they returned home. So these people that were stranded, worried about getting scurvy, they ate this, said it was delicious, but they also told me that it was not in the least windy or any other way troublesome to them. And he's saying that one of the great things about this particular St Kilda variety is it didn't make them fart. And Martin, writing in the 1600s, he always talks about kind of what the effect on your digestive system. Because again, in these days, you didn't have all the things for diagnosing diseases that we do. You had to just look at the kind of what there was for the digestive system, or kind of whether someone was too flushed, or what they felt like. You didn't have any CAT scans or anything like that kind of thing. So yeah, doctors worked in different ways then, for sure. So we'll move to wetlands, and we might move through fairly quickly, just to keep a wee eye on time, but we'll finish about 1:15 or something like that. Does that sound? And we'll have hopefully a bit of time for a few questions if there are, which I can unplug for. Okay. So this is a lovely tree, which is Alder, and you can see a photograph of it on the left and a beautiful illustration here on the right. And it's one of these trees, like many trees, that have got a bit of a kind of dodgy reputation, because when you cut through the wood on this, it's got red, it's just kind of red heartwood in it essentially, and sapwood as well. But people interpreted that as being blood, and kind of the blood of guilt. So that kind of gave this plant quite a bad reputation because people felt that maybe that blood suggested it had been used to make the crucifix, and the plant was feeling guilty. Now, the truth of the matter is you can't find these plants anywhere near the Holy Land, if you like. There's none of them in Palestine, so it couldn't have been made into the crucifix, but people would come up with these really interesting stories to explain why you found something interesting in nature, like red in the wood. It's probably blood. On a practical note, though, the wood is great because it doesn't rot at all. You can make really tough structures underwater. So if you were making a jetty or the cranogs, you know, those kind of like the kind of loch houses that would go out, like there was one at Loch Tay that kind of tragically burned down recently, and they would almost always have alder as the main thing for making the posts that drove into the loch to hold the actual structure up. So yeah, really useful, but with this sinister reputation as well. This is a really nice wee thing, which is a brand new species that was discovered maybe about 10 years ago at most. And this is our newest Scottish species. You can't find this anywhere else in the world. And in fact, the original parent of it comes from Alaska, I think it is, but it's established itself here, escaped from gardens in Shetland, and it's changed, it's kind of evolved to the Shetland kind of habitat effectively. So this is a brand new species, which is pretty amazing. Nothing folklore about it yet, but give it another 1,000 years, and I'm sure it will have some folklore developing. This one here, however, has been here much longer. So this is a native plant and just one of my absolute favourites. It's a wee thing called Butterworth. It's a carnivore, so it's like Venus flytraps a bit. It eats insects on these little pale green leaves. And it's called Butterworth because you can take it and drop it into cream or milk and it will curdle the milk because of the enzymes on the surface of the leaf. And it was a big part of the Lanarkshire cheese industry. It's like a kind of a rennet that you would normally use, but it's effectively a vegetarian version, and people would use that quite a bit. But it also has this funny reputation. It has quite a long tap root on the bottom, and people used to take the roots and they would turn them into a little hoop, and you could tuck it under like a baby's mattress or under a pail of milk, and supposedly that would keep the fairy folk away, because the fairy folk would normally come and they'd be the people who would curdle your milk or steal away your baby. Yeah, this kind of strange, sinister reputation that fairy folk had. But you had these little plant kind of structures or little plant charms to be able to help protect you against them. So some fascinating ideas, but we don't know quite where they came from. There's not really an explanation for it. It's just evolved as these ideas. So this is just a few of the names for it. And I just wanted to pull out a couple of them. So along with Butterwort, it's also called rockgrass and sheeproot. And it had this quite funny reputation as well, that if you took your sheep up onto the hill and they ate this, it would cause this kind of rot in their feet. And it got a really bad reputation because it supposedly would rot the feet of the sheep if they ate it. But if you take your sheep up onto the hill in the wet habitat that this thing grows in, it always grows in bogs, then they'll get foot rot anyway. It's not this poor plant's fault. There's nothing to do with it at all. We'll shift to grasslands now for a wee look at quite a lot of nice plants in grasslands, but this is one of the most beautiful. This is a kind of late summer flowering thing called lady's bedstraw. And like the name suggests, you could harvest it, dry it out and put it into mattresses or into pillows. And it was one of the softest pillows there was. And it gave a really nice fragrance as well. So it was considered the classiest of bedstraws for the kind of very high up ladies of the land. It's quite superb. And there's lots of reports of people over harvesting this, in fact. So collecting way too much of it in order to make these mattresses. Another thing about it is it has roots, like lots of other species quite closely related to it, that give off a red dye. So people would harvest it for the red dye too. And in fact, so much of it got harvested, even in the 1600s, that the king had to put out an edict, a kind of law saying, stop harvesting these plants from the sandy habitats in which they grow. Because when people harvest them, the wind comes in and just blows all that sand away. Okay, and it erodes the whole soil. So some of the earliest kind of environmental protection orders were because of this little plant. Quite amazing, because it's so versatile and useful. And then I love this. This is my favourite plant in the entire world, I think, if I had to choose one. This is bitter vetch, and it's a particularly kind of Scottish use that this plant has. So we don't really know great records of it from elsewhere. But this funny kind of like tuber, the bit at the bottom, it's a bit like a kind of wee potato. It was dug up and chewed, and it's got a slight licorice flavour, and it was used to flavour up whiskey, in fact, and it got an incredibly hilarious kind of reputation because people would chew it, and supposedly it could suppress your appetite, and it could give you energy to work in the fields, particularly in Gaelic-speaking parts of Scotland. And we're not sure about this. We've done a bit of experiments and things, and we're not certain if there's any kind of truth to that or not. But it got an amazing reputation, particularly with the non-Gaelic speaking people in the south and in England, who inflated its kind of abilities over the years. So through the 1700s, you had people saying that you could eat this and it would completely banish the effects of drunkenness, or it would enhance the effects of drunkenness, or lots and lots of really interesting kind of associated stuff. And it's, yeah, you can imagine any plant that suppresses the appetite has got quite a bit of potential for the future. So we'll have a bit more of a look at it, see if it's got any potential for use in the future, but we're just not quite sure, because one of the big things, of course, is if you think about it, in the past, medieval times and right through until recent times, people's lifespans were short, and we don't always know why that is. It could be, and we're not certain, that people using particular plants, it might have cured them of something, but actually could have long-term quite dangerous effects as well. So we're actually doing quite a bit of research into looking, if we are thinking about resurrecting some of these uses or investigating new ones, we need to be sure we know what we're doing. So please don't go out and try this at home. Okay. And I just put this one in just because it's kind of a really nice illustration of clover. So you might all know red clover is that classic thing that helps to put nitrogen in the soil. But one of the big uses for it, of course, was just that simple kids thing of harvesting clover, putting it in your mouth, and then sucking off all the sweet nectar that's in there as well. So quite a lot of the names for this relate back to its nectar, which is just a wee simple thing you can do. In woodlands, we've got lots of other really nice, tasty plants as well. So this is wood sorrel here with a wee illustration of the flower by Fiona Ward there. And wood sorrel, I don't know if you've ever eaten it, but it's like sorrel itself. It's got a really sharp, appley taste, really easy to identify, but it's this little thing that looks like a clover, but grows in woodlands. And yeah, it's very nice indeed. Don't eat too much of it, but yeah, a lovely, refreshing kind of taste to it. On the other side of things though, if you're not looking for a snack and you've actually got a really bad stomach, if you had worms, for example, giving you a really bad stomach, then you'd want the thing on the left. But I definitely wouldn't recommend it. Ferns, like this kind of Dryopterus here, were pounded down and made into medicines that people would drink to kill off worms and other intestinal parasites. And they're chock full of really dangerous poisons. And I can't help thinking people must have been really living on the edge and damaging themselves very badly, but at least it got rid of that immediate problem of intestinal parasites. Sorry, were you hoping for a talk that would be a bit less grisly? Because I'm afraid a lot of it is quite grisly stuff, I have to say. That's it. But some of it's quite nice as well. So things like wild garlic, which you might have kind of collected yourself, that's on the right-hand side here, is just beautiful. A great thing you could put with like breadcrumbs on top of salmon, but it was also used for cooking right throughout the ages. And often what would happen with cooking was it would be a bit like what we would think of as superfoods. So if you're eating wild garlic, you would also be supposedly helping to prevent kidney stones, because people thought that garlics and onions would be good at preventing kidney stones. If you had a really sort of unstable stomach, you would eat blueberries or blaeberries from the hill as well. And very often the foods that people were harvesting were also thought to have medicinal effects, and probably did as well. On the left-hand side, we've got quite a dangerous plant that can be a bit poisonous. Not too bad, but it's got these funny crystals in it. This is cuckoo pine, or kind of lords and ladies, it's known. Grows in woodlands as well. And the tuber at the bottom, in fact, all the parts of the plant, if you put it on your tongue, please don't. It gives you a really itchy tongue because these little sharp crystals that are in it. And we don't know how people did it, but people in famine times used to dig up these tubers when they had nothing else to eat, and they'd pound them down and make them into a flour, and then make them into bread or whatever else as well. And people have tried to recreate that nowadays, and every time they do it, the crystals are still there, and you still get an itchy mouth, yeah? And we think that, to be honest, there maybe was no way of getting rid of them. You would pound them down, you could wash them, you could roast them, do anything, but still you get those crystals. And we suspect it's just when there's a famine, you would eat that because you'd had to, and you'd have this itchy mouth, but it's better than starving, you know? It's quite different times in many cases. This one here is great. This is St. Johnswort, which I think is used nowadays, of course, as an antidepressant, as long as it's kind of used in conjunction with sort of doctor's advice. But it was known about that and works very successfully in the old days as well. So people in Scotland, probably more in Gaelic-speaking areas, this wasn't St. Johnswort, this was St. Columba's plant. And in different places where the different saint is the most important local saint, it's always their plant, yeah? But in Gaelic-speaking parts in particular, this was particularly good because if people were sort of suffering from what they interpreted as kind of like demonic possession or demons, kind of, which we would think of as a variety of psychiatric or mental health conditions, they would take this and wouldn't eat it. You could make lots of different ointments and things. But one of the classics was just take a bit and tuck it under your armpit. So one of its Gaelic names translates as arm. But the idea was because you've got thin skin under your armpit and hair as well, as you were walking along, getting a bit as antidepressants would make their way into your system through there. So really quite intriguing. They had good knowledge of that in the past as well. So yeah, we're doing okay, I hope, for time. This is just one quick one to say not many fungi, no mushrooms were really used much, particularly a few for a few little jobs in Scotland, but not that many. But this is a lovely modern use, this one here, which has, this is an ink cap, which when it gets old, it breaks down into ink, this kind of black inky stuff. And the artist here, Fran Thomas, has taken that ink and actually illustrated the fungus with it, which I think is just an amazing bit of work. It's great. So we're up the top of the mountains now. We'll have a quick look at a few things. Just one very rare plant that wouldn't be used for anything by Alexa Scott Plummer. This is a little potentilla that's so rare that we are conserving it in the Botanic Garden. And then here, another mountain plant. This is kind of sometimes known as mountain ash or rowan. And it's very, very famous. People still grow it. I don't know, for the people I can see, we might have a wee thumbs up if you know anybody or you yourself have one in the garden and grow it at the front gate at all. Yeah, it's quite a kind of, you'll notice it around, really distinctive plant with these bright red berries on it this time of year. And the reason for that, of course, and I think again a lot of people know this, is because it keeps away witches, which is impressive, really quite good. So that we don't know quite why that is. We think it might be the bright red berries were thought to be scary for witches, that kind of bright colour. But no one ever wrote it down why these were believed to work, which is always quite interesting. So yeah, that's great. But one of the things you could do was apparently take the wood and wrap it round into a hoop. People would get quite large round hoops, and if they were very big, you would drive the sheep or the cattle through it, or you would get a couple of hoops and put them either side of a fire and then drive the cattle past the fire. And that was thought to be another way to keep away the influence of witchcraft and the fairy folk as well. So again, we don't know why these traditions set up, so it's quite fascinating indeed. And this is our very last human habitat. Our very last habitat is the human one. So we've been from the coast up to the mountains, and this is one that we often forget about, the plants that we find in the city, because we always assume that people use plants from the wild. But it's amazing to see how adaptable plants can be, and quite how diverse the flora is in the city. So lots of these familiar things, some of the kales that you'd have in the kale yards, for example, they are unique to Scotland. So this particular Sutherland kale, you won't find anywhere else at all. So it's a really nice illustration of that by Lizzie Sandler. And we have these, a couple of other ferns there. And this is interesting, you'll see these in walls out all around cities or kind of in towns as well. Very, very common. But in the past, apparently these two things, so the maidenhair spleenwort and the one on the right hand side is hart's tongue. People took the two of them and brewed them into a beer, and apparently it was used to combat TB, tuberculosis, and we don't know if it worked. This was in the 1600s, so really quite far back indeed. We don't know if it worked or how it worked, but it's definitely one of these things where we should be looking at it again as a nice opportunity, because tuberculosis is back on the rise again. Some of this old knowledge could be useful. And this is another one. I suppose we've had a look at drinking beer. This is now smoking, this one here. It's probably one that a lot of folks may know. This is called coat fruit. You might come across coat fruit back. Quite fascinating stuff. And the leaves of this dried out and then shredded were used as a tobacco substitute. So this is just pictures of the flowers here. And the flowers come up before the leaves. So it's this one of its common names is son before fathers. Wonderful plant. And I just thought I'd put a kind of slightly closer picture. Hopefully you've got a big enough screen just to see the work that Eleanor's done here on this illustration is so fine detail. It's just, I'm blown away. It's Eleanor Christopher's work here on vellum. Great. So I think we're making good time. We've got a couple more, and Nettles, one of these, very, very versatile, used medicinally, but also used as a source of fibre. It got a bad reputation for its stings, but actually, even back in Roman times on Hadrian's Wall, which I think is a bit, obviously a bit farther south, on the border though, supposedly the Romans would take nettles, and when they were cold in this Baltic Scottish climate up here, they would take nettles and they'd hit their legs with nettles, and that those stings would warm them up supposedly. So bit of a bad reputation, but undeserved, I think I have to say. Then I thought we'd probably finish up just with one of the national flowers, I guess, just with a kind of contrast between a couple of illustrations that folk have done. And there's a lot of debate over which is the correct thistle for the kind of Scottish one. This one here, Circeum vulgare, the spear thistle, is the big chunky common one that you find in waste ground. But there's another one, an even bigger, taller one called Onopordon acanthium, which is actually a Latin name, obviously. But it's a great Latin name. It's the one that you might find occasionally on displays. You'll see it in Prince's Street Gardens, about 3 meters tall or 2 meters tall, with a huge big head on it and really silvery leaves. And actually, that's from the Mediterranean. It doesn't grow here, so it probably isn't our national flower. But when you look at heraldry, it often has a picture of that flower head rather than this native one here, the spear thistle. But I particularly love Onopordon acanthium, and I think there's a good case for it being the national flower of Scotland, even though it's from the Mediterranean, because the meaning of it, Onopordon, means a donkey's fart, because apparently this plant, whenever donkeys eat it, it makes them fart, I'm afraid to say. So that's how it got its old Latin name that's come through to today. And I just think it makes me especially proud to be Scottish if our national flower is called a donkey's fart. But to be honest, I think this one is a bit more realistic. This is a native, and I love the way that Sheila Anderson Hardy's done this quite atmospheric look, and then contrast it with this, which you'll know this is a much more photographic representation. This is Claire McGee's version of the same plant, and it terrifies me when I see this kind of art because it's so perfect, and hopefully when you see that you know exactly the one I'm talking about. But I also think that evokes the spirit of it as well. So yeah, I thought we'd sort of finish up there on a national flower. So just a few wee bits of names for the artists as well. And my final wee thing is something I'm really, really terrible at, but just a mention for this. Illustrations that you've seen there are all collected together in this book, Scottish Plant Lore, which we produce at the Botanic Garden. And yeah, it might be worth a read, but it's written by me, so probably a bit dodgy. I'd recommend many of the other books, to be honest. Okay. So
Scottish
hopefully you heard that okay. I've seen some bits of reaction. And yeah,
illustrations.
not too bad for timing, I hope. So I wonder if there's any questions or anything, or you could put things in the chat, and I might pop my headphones in and out if I need to speak to you. Okay, thanks very much.
Very interesting. That was good.
Thanks, Greg. While people are maybe having a wee think about their questions, I'd just like to thank you for that chat. It was really informative, and I've discovered lots of things that I didn't know about Scottish plants. I can't emphasise enough the book. I think I've got a different version. I've got a different colour cover, but I'm sure it's the same. It's the same book. Yeah, yeah.
You can eat ground elder like spinach.
Yeah, exactly. That's nice, actually. If you've had ground elder, I suppose a bit like with nettles, you know, you can make that kind of soup and spinachy thing. It's quite tasty, actually. And you know that you're combating gout as well, so you can have a wee bit of red wine with it, or port, I think it is. That's it.
Very good.
Into pesto.
Pesto. Sorry.
Any other questions? One that I have, Greg, I'm just quite curious. You talk about the research into the medicinal issues or the medicinal factors of these plants. Is there anything currently being done in terms of research that will kind of help us to almost like ascertain the true medical qualities of these plants? Is that something that's current, or is it just not of any importance at the moment?
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. There's always that wee delay, and then I can't hear you when I'm plugged in there. But yeah, there's a huge amount being done. It's incredible, but it depends who does it. So, like a lot of commercial companies will, especially some of the really big ones, will periodically do a survey of all the kind of chemicals they can find, and then they'll test them to see, okay, has that got anti-cancer properties? Has it got, is it good at kind of treating hypertension? But they do that all in glass in the lab, and they'll get it so far, but they might sort of survey like 100 different plants, and they'll find 5 that are promising for them. And then as they go through more and more tests, more of them drop off for various reasons, because they might have side effects or that kind of thing quite often. But also because it's done commercially, we know lots and lots of research is going on, but it's kept on the QT because if there's money to be made, then people don't want everybody getting in on the act. So there's a host of research being done there, but also there's some quite nice bits of government research, and we're helping with quite a bit as well that's active and available to everybody. So one of the big projects that has just been developed is things like gins and kind of cosmetics and all these industries that are booming quite a bit with these plant components. There's a big project now to start to look a bit like what Robert Sibbald was doing way back when he was looking at provision for the poor in time of dearth and scarcity, to look, okay, what's out there that's available, what could be harvested, how much could be harvested so we don't take too much, can we grow things, and when we do, what's the composition of them as well. So if people are taking blaeberries, then the blueberries or something, then will they have some really interesting active ingredients that would be good, that's going to be safe and usable in commercial stuff as well. So we're starting to do that quite a bit more in conjunction with universities and some of the other research institutes. It's really good. So I'll take my headphones out now and then I'll hear any other questions.
Yeah, we've got a question here from Andrew. Greg, he's just recommending your book, and he was wondering where the history and lore comes from, predominantly Gaelic or English sources. Did you hear that question?
Really great questions. It's a really nice, interesting mix, and so people like Mary Beath, for example, she would picked up a whole host of really interesting, mostly Gaelic, but mixed Gaelic and English from up in Sutherland in particular, which is quite recent contemporary stuff. But then Martin was a native Gaelic speaker and collected a whole host of information, and then he translated it over. So if you get a chance to read Martin's Voyage to the Western Isles, it's a really fascinating insight into what Scotland was like in the late 1600s, and lots of plant lore in there. But once he did that, then lots of folk came after him from the lowlands and from wider kind of Britain, and everything would go through translators. So you find that a lot of it gets lost or corrupted and changed. So yeah, for the kind of components, we've got a mix of Gaelic and English, but you've also got to watch out for how these stories change over time as they get translated as well. And that actually adds to the richness of it all.
Yeah, I've got another question here.
That's just come up there for a small medicinal garden, how you suggest your starting point. There's loads of really interesting things. So it's whether you want to do something that's a bit historical or something that's more modern day. And I don't know if it's easy at all to get wherever you are to the garden in Edinburgh. But if you want to do something that's modern day, then we've got a really amazing set of stuff that we have in what we call our herbology beds. So we've got modern practitioners for kind of herbal medicine, but also herbal well-being, who are doing lots for growing stuff and developing and teaching with that. So that would be one thing. And then for historical stuff, if you wanted what we call an old physic garden, then we've got lots of information for that. So maybe the easy answer is get in touch and we'll point you in the right direction for things. That's Oh yeah, and any commercial Scottish growers specifically growing plants for medicine is an interesting one. So not necessarily so many native ones. There was a bit where people were trying to grow bog myrtle to keep away midges, but the jury was out a wee bit on whether that worked entirely as well as it could. But there's plenty of people who grow things like daffodils, you know, narcissus. When you see them in the fields, when they're grown for Easter time, you know, partly they're ornamentals, but also lots and lots of them are grown for the galantamine that's in them, which is actually one of the kind of things that people are using to combat things like Alzheimer's. And it's one of these kind of compounds that's used in very kind of modern medicinal side of things. So there are growers certainly doing that. And also yew trees, you know, there was a big scheme and still going on where when you clip your yew hedge, you could give your clippings over and people would then extract Taxol from it, which is a really important like chemotherapeutic for various kinds of cancer in particular. So this was, you know, councils would cut the yew hedges, pass all the stuff over, and you'd get tons and tons of yew, would get you a tiny, tiny amount, but every little bit helps in the fight. You know? So yeah, certainly it's going on. But there's not any large scale kind of groups or even kind of medium scale groups of folks who are going, right, let's grow quite a lot of medicinal plants. That is definitely something that's well worth a look. It'd be quite interesting.
Any more questions?
I'll just pop out my headphones. There we go. Sorry, Jean.
If anyone's got any more questions? Any more? No. If there's no more questions, I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank Greg. Thank you for this evening. It's been really great to have you. And I'm sure you'll have lots of visitors come to the garden and check out the medicinal parts of the garden. But really lovely to hear from the author himself of a fabulous book. And I'm sure we'll have all of our groups really doing a lot of research in relation to Scottish plant lore. But thank you so much. It's been lovely having you tonight, Greg, and glad the technology worked. And I'm glad to find out a wee bit more about the plants in and around the places that I stay. So thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. So I think that concludes the
Thank you
session.
very much. Sorry, it's been a bit slightly temperamental with dropping off and various other comedy bits. But yeah, like I say, if you are actually looking at gardens and developing them for any kind of thematic thing that you're thinking, then just, like I say, give us a shout and be happy to get in touch. Okay, you've got my email, Jean.
Yeah.
I think, so do feel free, just pass it on and I can pick it up. And if I don't respond, it's because the students are all back in at the garden. So just send another email with a big red exclamation mark and I'll get to it. Okay, it's been a pleasure. Lovely to see you all.
Yeah, thank you so much, Greg. Really great, and thanks for your time. Really appreciate it. Yeah, thanks. So just to conclude tonight, just to let you know that our next session, our next masterclass is going to be on Wednesday, the 27th of October. And we've got Colin Ainsworth, who's the new president of the Royal Valley Horti Society. Colin's going to do a masterclass on propagation for us. So I just want to thank everybody tonight. I hope to see you soon in the next few weeks, and happy growing and happy research for your Scottish plant lore. So have a good evening and thanks again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, folks.
Good night, everyone.